Welcome to the Dreamboat. Remember, you can join the DRI for just £30 a year. You get access to more content, including videos and discounts for our events. It's a great way of finding out more about our work, joining our dream community, and supporting this podcast. Details in the show notes and at driccpe.org.uk/membership. Welcome to the Dreamboat podcast, a place where we talk about everything dreamy, all you wanted to know about dreams and where you might find some answers. My name is Dave Billington, and I'm a psychotherapist, and I'm also director of the Dream Research Institute. And I'm joined by fellow psychotherapist Laura Payne.
Hello, I'm Laura Payne, and I'm also part of the Dream Research Institute. And we're called the Dreamboat because we are recording our podcast overlooking the beautiful canal barges here at Little Venice in London.
We'll be looking at dreams, talking to guest experts, and answering your questions.
Now, let's get on with the episode.
In our last series, we touched on questions about artificial intelligence and what it means for our understanding of human consciousness, or consciousness in general. That was the beginning of our series of vocational episodes that we call Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, based on the title of Philip K. Dick's famous science fiction novel. We're going to continue that conversation today.
Yes, things have changed a lot, even in the short amount of time that we've been talking about this. Neural networks and deep learning algorithms have very quickly gone from highly specialized tools used in theoretical labs to now widely available interfaces, available for free on our web browser or our phone. And of particular interest to us here, there are several projects now using AI tools to analyze, depict, and even generate dreams. These are so powerful, and they're definitely changing and influencing the field of dream research as we speak.
And today, we're lucky to speak with someone who is across all of this, with long experience in dream research, hypnotherapy, a visual art practice that combines traditional and digital methods and tools, and experiments with technologically driven and supported dream incubation.
Yes, our guest, Deirdre Barrett, is one of the dream world's AI pioneers. I was really lucky to catch up with her at the recent IASD, that's the International Association for Study of Dreams conference that's just happened in the Netherlands.
Deirdre is on the faculty of Harvard, where she teaches courses on dreaming. She has written 5 books, and she is the president of the IASD. She has lectured and led workshops at Esalen, the Smithsonian, and at universities around the world. Her visual art has been featured in shows in London and Berlin and in the Rome Biennale. So let's listen to the interview now.
So, welcome, Deirdre Barrett. We've obviously given you a big introduction, but thank you for your time today. I always see you as a very interesting dream pioneer because you're working with so many of the new AI tools. For instance, I think you were involved with the early form of ChatGPT. Tell me a bit more about how you work with these companies.
Yes, it wasn't actually the chat version, but GPT-3 had a beta testing version, but before anyone had ever heard of them outside of the computer science field. And they were soliciting research proposals and wanted as broad a variety of things that you might use it for. So Sam Shushin and I, who was one of my students, gave them a proposal that was to train it on 3 large dream data sets, a general one, my collection of pandemic dreams, and a collection of lucid dreams, to train it separately on each of those 3, and then ask it to generate further examples of each category. And it unlike the Chat GPT, it didn't have all these restrictions on how much it could get into sex or how much it could get into aggression. And I hear it now sort of won't discuss those aspects of dreams much.
It's got its own built-in repression now,
yes, but this was a much more broad-ranging, no particular breaks on version but a version 3. So not as advanced in most senses as the current ones, but also not with the rails on, was what we were using. So it trained on 15,000 pandemic dreams and about that many lucid dreams, and actually just 1,000 general dreams, which is a big enough
massive
training
database.
set.
Wow,
yeah.
15,000 pandemic dreams.
Yeah, I only set off intending to collect like high hundreds is what I needed at minimum to do a lot of data analysis, but I ended up with 78 countries represented, so I could look at that sort of difference. Because right after I'd set it up, I started getting calls from the media to my impressions, what people might, had I heard anything about what people might be dreaming about the pandemic? And I go, oh, I'm doing a survey on it. So a lot of articles came out in the major media that were talking about the study and linked to it to encourage people to, and then I was hearing from China and Korea eventually. And so I generated way more input than if I hadn't been doing all that media at the
And great
time.
for GPT. I mean,
Yes.
what fabulous data.
Yeah. So like I say, even the data set of 1,000 general dreams was enough for GPT to get the feel of what being dreamlike was like and generate text that looked completely like real dreams. The other dream researchers I had who looked over it informally agreed that they couldn't tell them apart from the human ones. If you'd like, I can read an example of one of the pandemic dreams.
This is a dream from chat, an early form of, I think it was GPT-3.
Yes, this was the GPT beta testing version, and this example is from the pandemic dream set it trained on and then produced its quote dreams. So this one was, the virus itself doesn't seem to be part of this dream. I had to go to a meeting with my work, and then all of a sudden I was at a stadium, and there were like 6,000 people, and a giant white snake was coming out of the stadium and was about to bite people. And then I was like, oh no, we need to get out. And then I was in a car with my sister, and I had an unconscious feeling in my legs, and then I woke up. And what I'm struck by is how well it captured the way in which dreams would represent the virus often as a metaphor. And nothing in our 15,000 had a giant white snake in it, but it had other menacing weird animals and groups of stinging insects and many threats stepping in as a metaphor for the virus. And then also, although some people dreamed about trouble breathing and spiking fevers, lots of people dreamed about other things were wrong with their bodies. And again, we didn't have an unconscious feeling in my legs in the actual data set, and yet it could see that was very analogous to the things it was reading.
And also, it's got the weirdness of a dream.
Yes. Yeah, the one on general ones is just everything has that odd illogical things happen and sudden jumps, transitions of just, and then all of a sudden I was in another place that you wouldn't have in a waking narrative. So the general ones just all looked generally dreamy, and then these pandemic ones looked generally dreamy but had a lot of anxiety and had some things that looked metaphoric for COVID. And then the lucid dream data set generated these things that looked dreamy, were more positive on average, much more so than the pandemic data set, and had some moment where the person was realizing that something was impossible and sort of goes through this odd puzzlement and then realizes it's because it was a dream. And again, they would not output the same thing that was being noticed as odd or the exact language of how they had the moment of realizing it was a dream, but it had really gotten the general process abstracted very well.
What do you make of that? You know, what's happening here? Obviously, the machine isn't dreaming. The AI algorithm isn't dreaming. It's conflating stuff. But what do you make of it?
That the program understands language very well in the first place. It has to, and that's taken decades for computer science to arrive at. But it's also really reading and abstracting into categories and types of visual of statements, but also kind of visual images being described, which is what the dreams are more about. And that it's very good at generalizing the characteristics of, poems versus jokes versus normal conversation versus dreams.
Subtle. It's quite subtle in the subtleties of language.
Yeah, and if it has a large enough data set, it can get what is very distinctive to that data set of text that is unlike other text, and it can, it's good with learning what poems are. It's good with learning what sort of uptight academic prose is like. It's good at learning any particular vernacular. As long as it gets enough examples, it can generalize about any type of text, including dream accounts. I mean, I can't say for sure it's not dreaming to get at this, but I certainly don't think of it that way. But it's imitating a huge set of dream accounts. It's seen very, very, very accurately.
Yes, it's that sort of a simulation of, I suppose, let's call it data, and finding patterns, isn't it? Within it's not necessarily dreaming; it's copying dreaming.
Yes, and other people have taken several different approaches to trying to get it to interpret a dream by training it on all these examples of what kinds of queries or what kinds of suggestions you make about interpretations. And again, if it gets enough examples of this, it can start saying, well, you have to rely on your own associations as the ultimate guide, but some possibilities of what this might be a metaphor in our culture are, and give some very plausible examples, very close to what a human would do in that situation.
Unfortunately, Dave and I did pitch ourselves against the Elsewhere interpretive app, and it annoyingly did quite well. I think our explanations of a dream that Sheldon Juncker had brought into that episode, I think ours were more perhaps encompassing. She says, trying to give herself a bit of an extra edge against the machine, but it was impressive.
Yes, and people are writing apps to do this kind of specifically, like a Jungian therapist would do or a Freudian therapist would do. But also, frankly, if you just input the question to Chat GPT now of I dreamed, recount a dream and say, what do you think it means? Without specific training on that, since it's trained on the whole internet and there's a lot of discussion of dream interpretation out there, just the very general Chat GPT will give you, quite an interesting and I certainly prefer a human there, and I certainly prefer the types of interpretations that are about asking questions to get at the dreamer's associations, and don't like any of the ones that are sort of trying to talk in Jungian archetypes or Freudian symbols nearly as much. But ChatGPT, you could say, give me a Freudian interpretation of it, but you could also say, ask me some questions that will help me understand it. So the general ones can do pretty good with dreams.
Yeah. And what did it make of the lucid dreamers, out of interest? Obviously, it would mimic a lucid dream, but I suppose it's not going to be fully lucid, is it?
Well, I don't think it's probably conscious at all. But again, we have no way of knowing. Consciousness is a subjective experience. But the two things that it was dreamlike in the sense that it was for the other two categories. But then it both tended, like most lucid dreams do, to have a point of noticing that something wasn't possible or wasn't right or was implausible, and sounding puzzled for a minute, and occasionally even offering other explanations for why things might not be behaving properly, and then a breakthrough moment when it either just completely realized it was a dream in a moment, or, as some other lucid dreams do, kind of begin to wonder if this could be a dream, and kind of try to check that out further. And yet it did not completely recreate the specifics of any examples in the data set. It came up with new ones that were equally plausible to be some lucid dream that just hadn't been dreamed yet.
Exactly. You also worked, as well as with the exploration of ChatGPT, but you also worked with Bell Labs, I understand, in some of their early dream work.
Yes, I worked with Sanja Sapotnovic and her crowd at the Bell Labs that's based in Cambridge, England. And one study that we did was to take a large data set of very general dreams, but in this case, not to ask it to imitate texts of dreams, but to come up with categorizations of what the main clusters of types of topics, to see how much it would be like the human scales, like the most commonly used dream rating scales are the Holland-Van de Kessel system, but there are a lot that psychologists have developed for what we just a priori decide would be the main key content that we're interested in dreams. And so we asked the deep learning program to just, without any preconceptions about what should be important in dreams, to see what were the categories that were kind of consistently occurring fairly often, what the main content categories were. And really the main finding was that it did largely produce categories that were very similar to the Holland-Van de Kessel and other scales, such as sort of like the 5 major emotions of happiness and sadness and anger and so on, came out. Being indoors versus outdoors as a difference is a common scale in those systems, and those were 2 dichotomous clusters for it. A few main types of human interactions were there. A few of the sort of most often mentioned types of objects. So it was very much like the rating scales we've developed in other ways, with some very interesting exceptions. It's had some categories that don't show up in Holland-Van de Kessel or other things psychologists come up with. Just for example, weather was a big cluster. Humans have never had a rating scale for weather in dreams.
Unless they're British, I want to say.
Oh, well, you don't have much range to rate there. But even more than the British are concerned with the weather, the primal humans, hunter-gatherers on the savannah, living in small tribes, were extremely concerned about. We had to pay attention to the weather through all of human evolution, that we're still sort of programmed for life on the savannah. It's why we seek out sugar and fat. They were very rare and we needed a little bit, and now we're still prioritizing them in a world where we're just swimming in them. But back to the weather, clearly, you could have a flood and drown. You could have, huge storms that made it impossible to hunt or, find game that way, weather that would destroy your huts. So
heat exhaustion.
Yeah. So paying attention to everything about the weather was
important to survival.
Yes, crucial to survival in those days. And I think we're still instinctively programmed to that. Like we talk about the weather all the time, even now that it sort of, we can go inside easily or put our umbrella up. So anyway, that was a big category. And I think it's just because AI searches with no preconceptions about what the category should be, that it's really observing what's there in the human psyche. And psychologists are still very interested in all the emotions and types of human interaction, and even whether you're indoors or outdoors, but not so much in the weather anymore.
Yeah.
So we really don't see that weather is a very strong and frequent content in the dream, but the AI can point that out to us.
Interesting, yeah. And so as a result, it's sort of helping psychologists probably develop the tests even better.
Yeah, and really think about what dream content is about, that certain categories that sort of don't matter in modern psychology are just become sort of theoretically invisible to us. So it was interesting to have
it. And are they being wrongly overlooked?
Out.
In many ways, again, the algorithm, in this case through Bell Labs, is showing up something that instinctively we know as humans is important to us, as you say, not just as our survival, but our relationship with the outside world. How interesting that it's the program threw that up, not the psychological testing.
Yes, and I think in one way you can still question whether it matters to us to be rating those things that much. I think we do care about the ones that are still equally important to modern day life and that are more psychological in nature. But I think just especially the cognitive psychologists that are just looking at what are dreams about and what are determining the content, that the fact that these are still important to our brain and our instincts, whether they're as much what we want to focus on for some other purposes, is an interesting thing for AI to point out.
Exactly. I really like that one, actually. I think that's absolutely fascinating. And I think the other area, which, you've almost claimed as your own, is the use of, the developing use of, I suppose, I don't know if AI is appropriate, but digital art of dreams. You work with a program called Exactly .ai, which is an art program, for want of a better description. And I mean, your art is fabulous.
Well, I actually do two very different things with art. The main art that I make seriously and have in the ISD shows and in some galleries, it is digital art, but it is not AI art or deep learning. It is lightly computerized in the sense that I'm drawing with a stylus on a digital tablet, and yet in the program I can tell it that this is to be treated as an ink pen, or this is to be treated as a narrow brush or a wide brush, and the brush can be treated as having oil paint or watercolors. So it's drawing on the standard media in what it's going to look like, but I'm really basically just line drawing in all these cases on a stylus. The huge advantage for me is that I don't think I have real good eye-hand coordination. So when I used to draw with real pens or brushes and paint, I would just very often, my first try, I'd make a mistake that, you know, if you're not sketching lightly in pencil, you can't erase in most physical drawing and painting. But in these programs, there's a function where you just say, erase the last stroke, and then you can try it again. And I often, draw my key lines and shapes a dozen or 20 times before it looks right to me. So I'm very slow, but I can eventually get it exactly what I want it to look like in digital painting, which is not true with real paints. It would just turn into a smeary mess if I were trying to redo things. So that's why I used to try painting and drawing a little bit, but I never was very happy with it until I actually stumbled onto it by deciding I could make photo collages and digitally manipulate them a bit, and then draw over them a little bit for things I couldn't find. So I started working in Photoshop, but with piecing together different parts of photos to make something that reproduced the dream. And very gradually I was drawing on it more and more and using the photography less. So there's some other programs just for painting with digital tablets, but because I started with the photography, I'm actually using pen tool and brush tool in Photoshop, since that's how I got started. So that is how I make my main art that I display. I think you wanted to know about the dream that went with one of those particular images.
Yes, I do. I just briefly on that, Exactly AI, which is the name of the program. I know you're a beta tester of it. You didn't come at this as a fully trained artist, did you? You're a psychologist, I think, by
right, yes, no, I have no formal art training at all whatsoever. I mean, I'm sort of what is usually meant by an outsider artist, except
it doesn't look
except
like
when
it,
you have a Ph.D. in something else that sort of doesn't let you be an outsider artist. So I had done most of the work with the digital programs before I got involved with the Exactly AI. But they were creating a program to make art in a sense very much like Dali and Midjourney and the main ones in that market, except they were responding to all these artists who are upset about their work having been used in the database. Scraping their art is what it's called. And there's some lawsuits going on about it, which frankly, I don't think it's copyright violation, and I don't think they're going to win, but there are lawsuits in progress, and I'm not a lawyer, so who knows? Yeah. There's a database where you can look up whether you've been, quote, scraped and sign on to these lawsuits. And I was just curious if I was in the database. So I had looked myself up and found that, yes, indeed, I was in the database, but I don't mind at all that it's training on almost all the art ever made. I'd be offended if it wasn't including mine as some of the art it needed to train on. So I'm not in the group that minds, but I have heard a lot about and understand that some people are upset about that. So Exactly AI had decided to get around that and distinguish themselves by offering artists the opportunity to train a model on their own art. And then they could restrict use of it just to, they would have this model and they would pay Exactly AI to do that if they were keeping it private. And then they could dictate new descriptions of art they wanted to make, and it would do it in this thing that looked at least somewhat like their usual style. But they also, the other part of their business model is that if the artist wants to offer it to other people to make style in the style of that particular artist, then people can use it, and then they will pay to use it, and half the money goes to Exactly AI and half goes to the artist. But I just got involved in the beta testing. They reached out and said they liked my art, which they'd seen on Instagram or somewhere, and would I like to be one of their beta testers to develop a model or models. They said if you made art in different styles, that you should train in a bunch of similar pieces and you could make more than one model. So I actually trained one on my old digital photo collages and one on my new all sketching in the brush tool kind of thing. And actually the brush tool one did not come out, it came out looking much simpler than, I mean, sort of like my art, but simpler. Whereas I thought the photo collage one came out looking almost indistinguishable from things I would have created. Even though I actually like my current digital painting style better for what I make, I liked the model for the other better. So then they had a couple of shows, one in a gallery in Berlin and one in a gallery in London, that they asked some of the people where they thought the models had come out the best we would participate. And we just had to say yes, and they printed up our pieces and had them in these nice galleries.
An artist being shown in galleries in Europe.
So that's the only place that my AI deep learning produced art has ever been shown, is in 2 shows run by Exactly AI. And I think it looks pleasing artistically, but the dictations can only take a certain amount of detail. So the figure is always standing the wrong way or doesn't have quite the expression they did in the dream. And a big point for me is completely, as perfectly as possible, recreating the actual dream image. And I think they create things that may be as visually pleasing and that do look somewhat like my style, but just
missing the nuance.
You can't just give them hundreds of sentences of where everything's supposed to be and exact nuances of what things look like. It'll take a certain amount of direction, and then it starts ignoring the rest of it. So I'm not, unless they get a lot more exactly, probably going to start doing my main art that way. Although, I mean, all of AI is improving so fast that it may get there. Yeah. But I was in 2 shows of deep learning AI art, and that was a lot of fun. But it's general digital art, which is, I mean, there's a computer program that does the erasing and will smooth lines, and that's reading off the tablet to put it on the screen. But that's computer science, but it's not what's usually meant by AI.
Well, I should say that we'll put some links to Deirdre's work. I mean, it's truly lovely. So, and you are a fabulous artist as well as being an amazing scientist, Deirdre. So you really you're a real polymath in that way. One of I think we were going to do a Dream of the Week around one of these amazing pictures, which again we'll put a link to so people can see it. Now, and I really love this. I love the colours of it. It involves a sort of a woman with like owls on her head. Tell us a bit more. This is our Dream of the Week. So over to you, Deirdre, about the Dream of the Week and the piece of artwork that sits with it.
So the dream was of several people outside at night, and in the center of the group was this woman, and she was It wasn't very explicit whether she was under a blue streetlight or she somehow was maybe it was the moon. She was more lit up in the center of the group, and the other parts of the group were kind of darker and more peripheral around her. But I actually didn't see where the light was coming from. But she was under, kind of in a blue light, and they were just chatting as a conversational group, and all of a sudden 2 owls flew down from the sky and lit in this sort of barrette-like hairpiece that she had on that extended upward. The 2 owls lit on top of her hairpiece, but essentially on her head. And she was extremely distressed as they flew down. She looked up with this, not so much horrified as just dismal, unhappy, victimized expression as they landed on her head. And then she stood there in the center of the group, just looking upwardly, miserable and hating this, but also I just realized she was obviously such a passive person that she wasn't going to do anything about it, and almost out of sort of social compliance, like it would be too rude to shoo the owls away. So she was just kind of helplessly wishing they would go away, but going to stand there and endure the owl sitting on her head rather than take any action about it.
So what do you make of the dream?
I dreamed it long enough ago that it's not like fresh, and I can't say what had happened that day that might have triggered the issue for me. I mean, I think that I sometimes myself will not like something, but be a little timid about asserting my right to not have somebody sit on my head. So I think it's definitely about a tendency in me that's being very exaggerated. But also, I've definitely, as a clinician, I've worked with clients who I thought had infinitely worse cases of that tendency than I myself do. So one thing I wonder is if I had just been talking with either a client or a friend who had done something like that, and whether I was partially representing some other person who does the most extreme versions of this, or I was just representing a very extreme version of what I myself do. I'm sure there were some day triggers that I can't retrieve, but it's that tendency both in myself that I would like to get past, but in some clients who just immobilize their life much more than, I put up with things I shouldn't, but I know people who inconvenience themselves infinitely worse with that. Just that, I don't like this, but I don't want to be rude.
Mm-hmm. I was intrigued. Let's go straight in on the sort of Jungian method first. What do you associate with owls?
In general, I would say that I think of them as wise, and there's something about them as creatures of the night, that they're sort of in control of their work. They're the main predator out at night. So predators, but intelligent and of the night. But there was something about these particular owls and what they did that I was very aware that they were just ignoring her. That the headpiece on her head was what they perched on, and I think they were completely unaware of a person under it, or that they were inconvenient. She was miserable, and they seemed to just be in their owl world that was more about what mice might be out. and so just these particular owls in this dream, I just had this feeling of just having their own agenda that kind of couldn't even notice human feelings or something. That's not my main association when I just say owls, but the owls in this dream were night predators who were treating this human being like a branch to perch on.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? I was thinking from a Jungian point of view, suddenly we have, as you quite rightly pointed out, the owl, the bird, always seen as the bird of wisdom, has a strong connection with Athena in the Greek mythology. And she was also, like Diana, she was the huntress as well. And she was the goddess of wisdom. She was the goddess of Athens and the main sort of female goddess in that respect. So there's a lot of strength, there's a lot of sense of female power that comes associated with the owl, and in the image that goes with this, which is so beautiful, Deirdre. I love the colours, the blues, and the lines that you've used to draw it. It's got a very long, almost fluid feel about it, as if something, not just fluid, an airy feel, like the owls, that something's just descended. And I was thinking, you are a woman of wisdom, but people come and sort of seek you out for your knowledge about the dream world, but also your knowledge as a psychologist and as an artist. And there's something about the embodiment of your wisdom and your power, it feels like, in this dream in some way. And that it's okay to stand in it. You don't have to, it's not about being rude almost. It's like just embodying something. I don't know, how does that sound for you? It makes sense in a sort of a logical or kind of mythological. When you say that, I like owls. I think of myself as somebody that might like an owl to perch on my head, and that would be nice. And I'm certainly familiar with the myths
that would associate them with females. But on the other hand, it also pushes me into noticing what is specific to these owls that's atypical of owls. And I hadn't said it before, but you're mentioning the feminine made me think that I was very aware that these two owls were male. They were perched on a woman's head, but they were male. And I think it may be more like some training to defer to male authorities. In this case, with these owls on this woman's head, and with whatever was going on that day, in a way that owls in another dream of me could represent something more feminine or something more positive or something you'd want to embrace rather than need to be resisting and asserting yourself, against.
And just the sort of an aside, because Dave and I often talk about the notion of cosmic humour and the wordplay. I'm sitting here, I should say to the audience, I'm sitting here with Deirdre. She has an amazing barrette, a hair clip in her hair. And again, the owls in the dream land on this barrette. But also Deirdre's surname is Barrett, which is almost the same spelling as Barrett, and I found that just really quite tantalising.
Yes, and I just happened to be in an entirely blue dress today.
You do.
I'm not always. I do wear barrettes often, but I'm sure if you saw me yesterday, I had my hair down, so certainly not all the time. But yeah, it's not like she's me, it's like she's a part of me or a tendency in me, I think. And I think it's more in relation to males than it is in relation to wisdom or feminine owls or anything like that.
And when you look back at the drawing, having just spoken about the dream now, what do you sense? Does the artwork capture the dream for you properly?
Well, what was the most vivid in the dream that I was the most trying to capture was her expression was so sort of hyper real. And the owls were pretty clear, but I actually first drew it with two figures to either side of her because she was in a group of people when this happened. And I printed it up and had it in one show as that three figures. And then I decided that I didn't like that the figures on either side of her had, in the way I painted everything, came out almost as prominent as her, and maybe served to de-emphasize the owls a little bit. And so I produced a version where I just cropped them out, and it was just her in this blue glow with the two owls on the headpiece. And that, even though that left out some detail that was there, it felt like it zoomed in on the
cool
detail
stuff
I wanted to. But within that, at the center of that, is her facial expression. And I often am trying to draw the whole person very like they are, what they're wearing, the shape of their face. But I've got a really stylized, not terribly realistic human face and figure for her. And that's not because that was exactly what she looked like. It was because, rather atypically, I couldn't really see the full outline of the sides of her face, and her garment I think they were really not there, but they were certainly not there in my memory, whereas the facial expression was just so front and center that I wanted to almost de-emphasize the other areas because they didn't have specifics to them in the dream, and yet I didn't want to not have a side of her face or any torso. So I just made those more stylized and less realistic to play up the central facial expression that carried the core of the feeling in the dream.
Well, we'll put a link to that so people can see, and that will bring all of this hopefully alive for people.
The piece, by the way, is called Unwelcome Guests, which again is trying to capture the core feel.
Deirdre, thank you. Thank you for your time, and keep going on being a great dream pioneer in this sort of new strange AI and computer world that's invading our dream life, it feels like. Thank you.
It's been very interesting to talk to you.
So, Dave, having heard all of that, what did you make of the interview and of Deirdre's dream? What came up for you?
Well, really fascinating, and thank you again, Laura, for talking to Deirdre and taking the time with her at a very busy conference. There's something that really occurs to me when I hear Deirdre talking about working with AI, working with GPT. And it's a language thing. It trips me up whenever we're talking about AI. She says, well, it's clear that it understands language really well. And it's like, well, what is the it? And what does understand mean in this case?
I know, I agree.
It's an odd thing, isn't it? She's very clear. And I really admire this about, listening to Deirdre and having heard her speak and having spoken with her. She's very disciplined about what she can say is known and what is not known. So she'll say, I don't know if it's conscious. I don't know if it's dreaming. I don't think so. But I don't, I can't say for sure. And yet then, in the conversation, because colloquially, this is how we talk about it, it understands language really well. And it just sprains my brain slightly. What does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. I know that we're going to run a bigger episode on the panel that we hosted at this particular conference, where we look at the relationship between artificial intelligence and consciousness, and how, if you're not going to define a human existence by thinking, because there are machines that can do that, is dreaming and other forms of consciousness going to be the litmus test for being human? But one of the things that came up for me is this confusion in language between what is intelligence and what is consciousness. And I know we briefly explore it, but I think the trouble is, once everybody starts talking about this type of material, that the language means that we start subsuming all of this stuff, and that the two concepts become very confused. And I think I came away actually from the conference, and when it will be probably hopefully one of the next things we put up. It's going to be an extended episode, but one of the things that I came away thinking was, from a philosophical point of view, both categories need to be quite clearly defined, so that it is quite clear the difference between the two.
That's a really good point, and well made. I think this is where I think it gets confusing with these complex algorithms, learning algorithms, essentially machines that mimic apparent thought. But is that the same thing as actual thought?
It's an age-old debate. Philosophers have been rampaging through this stuff since Descartes, and probably beforehand with the ancient Greeks. But, AI doesn't threaten these concepts, but brings them sharply into relief. And I think that's what makes it exciting, because we really do have to think, as part of all of this, what does make us human?
Yeah.
What a great subject. I find the whole thing exciting. And is it going to be dreaming? Are we going to be able to program a machine to dream? And will that be the same as real dreaming? Obviously, for me, the answer is no, but I'm prepared to be persuaded otherwise, perhaps.
Yeah.
Perhaps not.
So another interesting thing, hearing Deirdre, who's got lots of experience in working with technology and working with this AI technology, and it's kind of sidestepping the philosophical question, not sidestepping, but just kind of going, okay, well, that's one thing, but also then what else do we learn? Here's this magnificent tool. And when you use it, when you generate dream reports, apparent dream reports, when you have it analyze dream reports, what do you learn from it? and also that she's been experimenting in the visual art space with it as well, and was kind of going, well, what can we do with it? And it's really exciting to see that. And you use the word pioneer when you're talking to her and you're talking about her, and it really does seem she's at the cutting edge of just seeing, well, here, it's here, whatever it is, whatever it means, it's here. What can we do with it? And kind of really enhancing her own creativity, her own thinking, and her own research with it as well.
Yeah, it's truly exciting what she's doing, and I fully admire and respect how, she's really got to grips with it and is showing all of us the way. And obviously we talk about in her Dream of the Week about this wonderful image, which we'll put up with the podcast so you can have a look, and also have a look at some of the other images and art that Deirdre has put together using AI. We'll put the link to her website where most of it's featured, and it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Beautiful work.
Yeah. And then so there was this particular image of, the dream image, and the particular dream of the owls coming in and landing on this poor unhappy woman's head. I don't know why I'm laughing. It's actually quite distressing in a way, but it's quite remarkable. And she's created a beautiful piece of art from that image, which, as you say, we'll share. Really interesting to hear the conversation around that. And of course, based on our recent experiences of going up against an AI with dream interpretation, it makes me wonder what happens if you put that dream into something like the Elsewhere app or one of the other interpretation apps.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to end. I think it's exciting times wherever this all takes us. One way or other, it's going to influence all of us, as well as influencing our dreams, which is quite an interesting bit of feedback loop. But yes, it's an interesting topic. We will undoubtedly return to it again. So thank you, Deirdre. And from me, sweet dreams.
And from me, keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.
So thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Don't forget to like us and leave comments on your favourite podcast platform. As I'm sure you know, that's the way we build an audience for the Dreamboat podcast, and also to spread news about dreaming. And as we said, there are many ways you can share your dreams at the DRI, the Dream Research Institute.
Yes, we have courses, events, and workshops, and we want to hear from you. So check out the show notes for links, or find us on Instagram and on our Facebook page and on our website at driccpe.org.uk. And if you want to explore your dreams further, or you would like to support us, you can join the DRI as a member for just £30 a year. As a member, you will get discounts for all of our events and short courses. You'll get our newsletter with latest dream research news, and we'll also be adding other special member benefits during the year. Of course, members' dreams will always be given preference for reading on the podcast Dream of the Week slot. So go to the link on the show notes and become a DRI member today. Keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.